Where are you watching from? Because tonight, I need you to understand something before I begin. I didn't lose my family all at once. I lost them in pieces. Small, quiet moments. Glances that lingered too long. Phone calls that stopped coming. And smiles that felt rehearsed. My name is Ruth Miller, and I used to believe blood was thicker than money. I was wrong. I'm 71 years old now. I live in a modest house on the edge of a quiet American town where lawns are trimmed, porches are swept every morning, and neighbors wave but never really ask how you're doing. From the outside, my life looks peaceful, simple, almost invisible. But invisibility is something you earn after people take everything else from you. It started the year my husband died. 39 years of marriage ended in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and old flowers. When they unplugged the machines, my children stood on either side of me, my son Daniel and my daughter Claire, holding my hands like they were afraid I'd disappear next. Back then, they still needed me. Or at least, they still pretended to. I didn't cry at the funeral. I had already cried myself empty during the months before. I stood there in my black coat, nodded at condolences, thanked people for casseroles I wouldn't eat. Everyone told me how strong I was. What they didn't know was that strength at my age is mostly just endurance. After the funeral, we gathered at my house. The same house their father and I had paid off decades earlier. The same house where I had raised them, protected them, and sacrificed for them. That night, Daniel poured himself a drink from my cabinet without asking. Claire walked through the rooms like she was already measuring the walls. They didn't see me. They saw opportunity. A week later, Daniel sat across from me at my kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner his father refused to replace because it had character. "Mom," he said gently, "we need to talk about the future." I smiled. Foolishly. He slid papers across the table. Legal documents. Financial plans. Words like asset management, trust restructuring, temporary authority. "It's just until you're settled," Claire added, her voice soft, rehearsed. Settled. That word tasted bitter. They said it was for my protection. That managing everything alone would be too much for me now. That I deserved peace. What they really meant was control. I didn't sign that day. But pressure has a way of wearing you down when you're grieving. When you're tired. When the people you raised look at you like you're already half gone. So I signed later. And that was the moment I became expendable. Within months, decisions were being made without me. Accounts moved. Property discussed in hushed tones. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Then came the day they sold the lakeside property. The one my husband and I bought when Daniel was 10. The one Claire learned to swim at. The one filled with summers, laughter, and quiet evenings I thought belonged to us forever. They didn't ask me. They told me. "It was a smart financial move," Daniel said. "You don't need it anymore." I remember sitting there, nodding slowly, while something inside me cracked open. That was the day I realized they weren't waiting for me to die. They were waiting for me to disappear. Over the next year, my calls went unanswered more often than not. Holidays became complicated. Birthdays were forgotten. Invitations stopped coming. And then, finally, they said the words out loud. "We think it might be best if you downsized." Downsized. From my own life. They wanted me gone. Quiet. Convenient. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I hadn't been as helpless as they believed. Because while they were selling me out for money, I was learning exactly who they were. And quietly, carefully, I was preparing for the day they would come back. Not because they loved me, but because their world would collapse. And when it did, they would remember my name. They thought selling me out was the end of my story. But it was only the beginning. After Daniel and Claire stopped calling regularly, silence settled into my life like dust. At first, I tried to clean it away. I made excuses for them. I told myself they were busy. that families drift sometimes, that this was just a season. But silence, I learned, is not empty. It's loud when you listen carefully. I spent my mornings alone, sitting by the kitchen window, watching the same street I had watched for decades. Children passed on bikes. Couples walked dogs. Life moved forward, indifferent to my grief. That's when I started noticing things. Small things my children never paid attention to. They never asked what I did with my time. They never asked how I paid my bills. They never asked why I didn't seem afraid. They assumed I was surviving on what they allowed me to have. They were wrong. Years before my husband passed, I had learned something important. Security isn't always loud. It doesn't sit in flashy accounts or boastful titles. Sometimes, it hides in patience, in preparation, in documents no one bothers to read carefully. You see, while my husband was alive, I worked quietly beside him. Not behind him, beside him. I handled logistics, records, investments, paper trails. I was the woman who made sure nothing fell apart while everyone assumed I was just the wife. That habit never left me. After my children sold the lakeside property, I went through every document they had made me sign. Slowly, carefully, line by line. I wasn't angry yet. I was observant. And what I noticed changed everything. They had authority, yes, but not ownership. Certain assets had clauses they didn't understand. Safeguards my husband insisted on, knowing exactly how the world worked. Clauses that required consent, not convenience. Clauses tied to timelines. Clauses that favored patience. They rushed. I waited. That's when I made my first move. Quietly. I contacted an old acquaintance. A woman named Margaret who used to work with my husband years ago. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't warm. But she was thorough. We met at a small cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and no background music. I told her everything. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just laid the truth on the table. She looked at me for a long moment before saying, "They underestimated you." I smiled for the first time in months. "Yes," I said. "They did." Over the next weeks, we uncovered things Daniel and Claire never expected. Investments still tied to my name. Leverage they overlooked. Protections that activated only under specific circumstances. Circumstances they were unknowingly creating. Meanwhile, my children were celebrating. New cars. Bigger homes. Vacations they posted online but never invited me to see. I watched it all from a distance, feeling strangely calm. Because the louder they became, the closer they came to the edge. Then came the call. Claire rang me late one evening. Her voice was strained, sugar-coated with concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she said, "we just wanted to check on you." Check on me. I asked how she was doing. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Trouble had entered their lives, not loudly, not dramatically, but like a hairline crack spreading through glass. I offered sympathy. Nothing more. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet, hands folded, heart steady. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was positioning. I wasn't plotting their destruction. I wasn't dreaming of humiliation. I was simply letting consequences catch up. Weeks later, Daniel showed up at my door unannounced. He looked tired. Older. The confidence he once wore like armor now hung loosely on him. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "We need to talk." I invited him in. Offered coffee. Listened. He spoke about business setbacks. Market shifts. Unexpected complications. He avoided specifics, but desperation has a scent, and I recognized it. "What do you need?" I asked gently. He looked relieved. Support. Access. A signature. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider. "I'll think about it," I said. That night, after he left, I stood alone in my living room and whispered the words I had been holding back for years. You sold me out. And now, you're coming back. But they still didn't know the truth. They still believed I was reacting. They didn't realize I had already acted. They came back asking for help, never realizing I held the key to their survival. After Daniel left my house that night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because something inside me had settled. A calm, unshakable certainty. The kind that only comes when you finally understand your position on the board. They thought I was deciding whether to help. In truth, I was deciding how much truth they deserved. The next morning, I received an email from Margaret. Subject line: timeline confirmed. I opened it slowly. The numbers were worse than I expected. Loans stacked on top of loans. Guarantees tied to assets they no longer fully controlled. And one crucial oversight, a clause that transferred decision-making power back to me the moment certain thresholds were crossed. Thresholds they had already crossed. Unknowingly. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. All those years they called me old-fashioned. All those times they dismissed my caution. All those dinners where they talked around me, not to me. This was what patience looked like. That afternoon, Claire came by. She didn't knock, she rang the bell twice, sharp and impatient, like she used to when she was a teenager. When I opened the door, she hugged me too tightly, too fast. Her perfume was expensive. Her smile wasn't. "Mom," she said, pulling back. "You look good." I thanked her and invited her in. She sat at the dining table, the same table where we once laughed, argued, celebrated birthdays. Now she tapped her nails against the wood, unable to sit still. "We're in a bit of a situation," she said finally. I waited. "Things are complicated," she continued. "Daniel didn't want to worry you." I almost smiled. They never worried about me before. She slid a folder across the table. I didn't touch it. "We just need you to sign a temporary authorization," she said quickly. "Just until things stabilize." Temporary. That word again. I looked at her. Really looked. The dark circles under her eyes. The tightness in her jaw. The fear she tried so hard to hide. "Why now?" I asked. She froze. "Why?" I repeated calmly. "After months of silence, do you suddenly need me?" Her voice sharpened. "Because you're family." The lie landed between us, heavy and obvious. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the same street. The same children on bikes. Life, still moving. "When you sold the property," I said softly, "did you think about how that would affect me?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. "When you decided I was no longer necessary," I continued, "did you ask what I might lose?" Her voice broke. "We didn't think." "No," I said gently. "You didn't." I turned back to her. "You saw money," I said. "And you forgot the cost." She stood abruptly. "Are you saying you won't help us?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to a cabinet and pulled out a thin envelope. Inside were copies. Documents she had never seen. Documents they assumed didn't exist. I placed them on the table. Her eyes scanned the pages. Her face drained of color. What is this?" she whispered. "This," I said, "is what you missed." She read faster now. Panic rising. She flipped pages, hands shaking. "You can't," she started. "I can," I interrupted. "And I already have." Her chair scraped loudly as she stood. "You planned this," she accused. I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I prepared for it." That's when she understood. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. This was consequence powered by foresight. Daniel called that night. Then again. Then again. I didn't answer. Because the truth was finally working its way toward them. Slow, undeniable, and irreversible. They had sold me out thinking I was powerless. Now they were learning. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. They thought a signature would save them. They didn't realize the truth had already caught up. The silence after Claire left my house felt different. Not heavy. Not painful. Clean. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying conversations in my head or wondering what I could have done differently. I wasn't carrying their mistakes on my back like invisible luggage. That evening, the phone rang again. Daniel. I let it ring. Then a message came through. Please. We need to talk. This is serious. I placed the phone face down and made tea. Because urgency, I've learned, always belongs to the one who waited too long. The next day, the news broke quietly. Not on television, not yet, but in the way markets whisper before they scream. A partner pulled out. A line of credit froze. A deal they'd bragged about for months suddenly required restructuring. By noon, Daniel was at my door. This time, he knocked. Softly. I opened it slowly. He looked smaller. Same suit. Same watch. But his shoulders were curved inward, like the weight of reality had finally found him. May I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He didn't sit this time. He stood in the middle of my living room like a man waiting for a verdict. We're in trouble, he said. I nodded. The board is panicking, he continued. Investors are asking questions. I waited. And your name, he added quietly, keeps coming up. There it was. Not mom. Not family. My value. I didn't realize, he said quickly, how much influence you still had. I met his eyes. You didn't realize, I said calmly, because you didn't ask. His voice cracked. We need you. That word again. Need. I gestured for him to sit. He did. Heavily. You remember, I said, when you told me selling the property was best for everyone? He swallowed. And when you said I was being emotional for questioning it? His hands clenched together. That was the moment, I continued, you stopped seeing me as a person. He shook his head. That's not true. It is, I said softly. Because if you'd seen me, you would have known. I stood and retrieved the same folder Claire had seen. This time, I opened it. Do you know, I asked, why everything is collapsing so fast? He didn't answer. Because systems built on shortcuts don't bend, I said. They snap. His voice was barely audible. What do you want? I looked at him. Really looked. This wasn't the son I raised. This was a man who thought security came from leverage instead of loyalty. I want honesty, I said. He laughed bitterly. Now. Yes, I replied. Especially now. His shoulders slumped. We used you, he admitted. We thought you wouldn't notice. The truth finally stood naked between us. And when it worked? I asked. He didn't answer. I don't want your apology, I continued. I want accountability. What does that look like? He asked. I leaned forward. It looks like you stepping back, I said. From decisions you were never equipped to make alone. His eyes widened. You're asking for control. I smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly. Calmly. No, I said. I'm reclaiming it. He stood abruptly. You'd destroy us. I tilted my head. No. I'd stabilize you. That's when fear replaced arrogance. You'd let us fail, he whispered. I met his gaze without flinching. I already did, I said. When you chose money over memory. He left shortly after. Not angry. Shaken. That night, Claire called again. This time, she cried. I didn't know, she sobbed. I swear I didn't know. I listened. Because sometimes people need to hear themselves break. I thought we were building something, she said. I didn't know we were tearing you down. I closed my eyes. You didn't ask, I repeated. The next morning, the collapse became public. Headlines softened the truth, but reality doesn't care for spin. And that's when they finally understood. I wasn't their safety net. I was the foundation they had stepped on. They came to me for rescue. They didn't realize rescue comes with rules. It's about what survives after betrayal has finished burning everything down. The weeks that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after chaos has exhausted itself. Daniel stopped calling every day. Then every week. When he did call, his voice had changed. Slower. Careful. Like someone who had finally learned that words have weight. Claire sent a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten letter. She apologized without excuses. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for help. She simply admitted what she had done, and what she had failed to see. That mattered. Because accountability isn't loud. It's honest. The company survived, but smaller, humbler, stripped of the arrogance that once fueled it. Control shifted quietly, legally, irrevocably. No announcements. No drama. Just reality asserting itself. I didn't attend board meetings. I didn't sit at tables that once dismissed me. I chose distance. Not because I was bitter, but because peace requires boundaries. Daniel came to see me one afternoon, months later. No suit this time. No rehearsed confidence. Just my son. I didn't understand strength, he said, standing in my doorway. I thought it looked like control. I stepped aside and let him in. Strength, I told him, looks like restraint. Like listening. Like knowing when not to take. He nodded. I don't expect things to be the same, he said quietly. They won't be, I replied. But they can be real. That was the truth. Some things don't go back to how they were. They go forward, wiser. That evening after he left, I sat alone with a cup of tea and watched the sun settle into the horizon. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I had won, but because I had stopped shrinking. I realized something then, something I wish every woman watching this would understand. Being underestimated is not an insult. It's an advantage. People reveal who they are when they think you don't matter. They show their hands. They show their greed. They show their fear. And when the truth finally rises, it doesn't need to shout. It just stands. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, if someone used your love, your labor, your loyalty as leverage, if they mistook your silence for weakness, remember this. You don't need to announce your worth. You don't need to prove it loudly. Just protect it. Because when the world collapses for those who chose money over people, the ones they dismissed are often the only ones still standing. Thank you for staying with my story until the end. If it touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own strength, share where you're watching from, and share this story with someone who needs it. And remember, sometimes the quietest people hold the strongest foundations.